Hey everybody, and welcome to Underscore. We're excited to have you here. In this presentation, we're going to be talking about creating and presenting your year-end report. So you've been doing amazing things this year, and we want to help you learn how you can kind of encapsulate all the impact that you've had and then share that out to the business. And I'm really excited today to be joined by Tom Studdert, who's the VP of Customer Education and Support at Therapy Brands. I'm going to introduce him a little bit more in a second. But first, just some quick housekeeping. So this webinar is being recorded. So if you have to hop off at some point, all good. This recording will actually be right here on this page. When you come back to it, you'll also get an email with the recording. This platform is going to automatically adjust your resolution based on your internet speed. So if you're having trouble seeing the slides, there's a little gear icon underneath your video, and you can manually override the screen settings there, which should clear up those issues. But if you need anything, you can also use the questions box. So there's a Q&A box underneath this video. We're going to have some time for Q&A later. So if you have questions, please throw them in there. You can also test out the questions box and let us know where you're calling in from. So I'm Shannon. I'm calling in from Black Mountain, North Carolina. And Tom, where are you today?
I'm calling in from Austin, Texas.
I'm so excited. Tom and I are going to get to meet in person in Austin, Texas next March at a conference. So if you want to let us know where you're calling in from, you can use that questions box. Also underneath this video, you can rate the webinar, you can leave us some feedback, you can let us know what you want to learn more about. Just an opportunity for us to hear from you there. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Tom, who has really had a pretty incredible background, not just in education, but customer experience. Now he's managing a support team. He's got this really holistic perspective. And so what I love about that is he has this experience running education, but also broader functions and having that executive perspective. So I really can't think of someone better to walk us through that annual reporting and how to tell the story of our impact. So Tom, I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit more and then take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. It's a pleasure to be here today and to talk to all of you about everyone's first love, right? Writing your annual report. I'm just kidding. I bet everyone on this call is thinking I would trade my left arm to not have to do this on an annual basis. But my hope is that by the end of this session, you'll see the benefits of not just writing and presenting an annual report, but going through the process of putting one together. And while yes, the report is ultimately for the audience you put it together for, it's really also for you. It's a summary of what you accomplished during the year and a plan for the future. So let's get started. As Shannon said, my name is Tom Studdert. I'm the Vice President for Customer Support and Education at Therapy Brands. At Therapy Brands, we are committed to transforming the mental and behavioral healthcare landscape. As the trusted partner for therapists and mental health professionals, we empower care continuity, elevate decision-making, and enhance client engagement through cutting-edge technology and data-driven solutions. We provide solutions for our customers, enabling them to provide care for their clients. I'll go a little bit more into my background here in a second. Just a little bit of a joke as a reminder that it's the end of the year and it is annual report season coming up upon us. But nothing to fear. This session is aimed at getting you ready with a foolproof method to not only help you put your report together, but to wow your executive team. And more importantly, to get something out of the process for yourself. Because again, the annual report isn't just for your executives. It should be something that is for you. I had a vice president for student affairs back when I worked in higher education. You used to tell me that if you're writing an annual report just to put it up on a shelf and collect dust, then you're not really writing an annual report. You're just writing a document. The idea for an annual report is something that should be something that is living and breathing that you can refer to over and over again. So quick agenda. The focus today is going to be simple. We're going to talk about the why, we're going to talk about the how, and we're going to talk about the what. And we'll leave some time at the end for some Q&A. So hopefully that's a good agenda for everybody. My clicker on my mouse is a little bit too quick for me, so I apologize. Before we get started, I do want to tell you a little bit more about myself and why I think I was chosen to speak to all of you today. So a little bit about my background. I have spent my entire career in some form or another working in education. Before entering the tech industry, I spent 20 years in higher education. And I was singularly focused on the orientation experience and the first year experience programming for undergraduate students at a collection of various colleges and universities, culminating at the University of Southern California and TCU located in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. In 2015, I made the pivot to tech, working for a company called ZoomInfo, which actually started as the name Discover.org, where I was employee number 100 and was asked to initially build out the learning programs. And that included employee training, sales enablement, and customer education. Sort of awkward, right? To have all three of those under one umbrella. But when you're a startup, you were wearing multiple hats. It's always where I tell people to be nice to your former students because you never know who's going to employ you someday. It was actually one of my former students that called me one day and said, hey, can you come start this? And so I took the leap of faith and I did. And I stayed there for a good 7.5 years before transitioning to a different company. And then ultimately about 5 weeks ago, I started at Therapy Brands, which is obviously in healthcare technology space, where I now oversee customer education and support, which is about 200 team members, where we are laser focused on providing expert training and support to our customer community. But as you can see from that red arrow underneath, the theme in my life has always been education, because I believe in the power of education. And I think that when we invest in customer education or any form of education, many of the other dominoes easily fall into place. So let's talk about the end of the year report, the why. When I was in my doctoral program, I was taught to start with the question why. So I think this is a good place to start here too. Why should we do an annual report? And it's quite simple. It's a strategic investment, and not just for the company, but for you and your team. It can showcase all that you have accomplished, even those things that have maybe gone unnoticed. What milestones did you hit? How many customers did you serve? How many individual users on your platform have you educated? What KPIs did you crush? What new courses did you roll out? Did you launch a new certification program that took off? Did you connect your programs to revenue? Great, those are the achievements, but can also give you a chance to reflect and learn from the programs that you launched. Did something maybe go off the rails? What would you have done differently? What were the brick walls that prevented you from getting it done the way it should have been done? And finally, you can plan for the next year to 24 months. You could include a gap analysis and an updated scan of the future of the business. How does your team fit into the future of the business as a whole? How will you continue to be relevant and cutting edge? And if you are a revenue generating team, what's your forecast? If you're a cost center, how can you align with retention? Show how you are an investment in the future, not just as an expense moving forward. So I'm going to give a little bit of foundational reading to you all. Hopefully some of you have already read this book, because I'm going to pause here and encourage everyone to read Patrick Lencioni's book, The Advantage. A good deal of what I'm going to talk about today is rooted in this book. It's an organizational health book that talks about sort of reporting out, and the things that I'm going to talk about are shaped by the words in his book. So much of how I believe what we do and showcase what we do and the relevance of our work, whether it's in customer education or customer experience as a whole, is detailed in these pages. So I highly encourage those of you who have not read this to do so. It's honestly how I shape my work. The leadership that I bring to the teams that I have worked with is truly shaped in this book, The Advantage. And therefore, I have shaped my annual report from goal setting to reporting. Okay, so small plug done for Patrick Lencioni's book, but I highly encourage it. Okay, now that we know why we should do an annual report, let's talk about how we write one. There's 3 key things. Consider your audience, keep it simple, and make it relevant. So let's go through those 3 things a little bit more in depth. First, your audience is the most important thing when putting together your annual report. Who is going to read it or hear your report? Likely the executive team, or maybe even your board. So there's 4 key elements when considering your audience. Let's go through these sort of one by one. 1, provide a summary. Bullet points are your friend and theirs. As someone on an executive team myself, I get inundated with information on a daily basis. I need the summary so I can swiftly digest and respond. And it's not because I don't care about the details, it's just because there's so many of it coming at me. Everything is coming at me from multiple directions. And so while I do care about the individual information points that are included in your report, I need the high level summary so that I understand where you're coming from, so that I can ask more detailed questions later. 2, the narrative timing is important. If you're presenting your report at a meeting or in a conversational tone, be concise and be precise. 3, align with the business goals. You're going to hear me reiterate this several times during this presentation because I think it is so crucial. If the leadership team has set larger company goals, and I say if, but when they set those larger company goals, if you have not aligned with them in your report, don't even bother doing the report, because what are you doing as an organization? It's crucial that your report and what you are doing align with those larger company goals. And 4, tailor that report. Know the team and think about who they are. For example, my team, every team that I've worked with knows that I am metric driven. I wrote a dissertation once in my life that was quantitative. So everybody knows I am all about the numbers. I like numbers because numbers don't lie. So if you're on my team, you probably want more numbers in your annual report than you want qualitative data. Now, if your executive that you report to is more qualitative, then you probably want to report more qualitative data than quantitative. So know who you're reporting to, know who you're presenting to, and shape your report for the audience that you're putting together your report for. Also, keep it simple. The old KISS adage applies here too. Keep it simple, stupid. And remember, sometimes less is more. So focus on metrics that don't overwhelm. There's a lot of numbers that we can report on, right? And I remember when I first started putting together annual reports that I had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of numbers. I had rows and rows and rows in an Excel document. And I remember being overwhelmed myself of what I could report on. So you have to figure out what's the top line numbers that you want to actually present to your executive team, because what you present is going to be what they take forward. Use really clear language. Use visuals and infographics, dashboards, charts, graphs, and showcase the before and after. For example, I love when you show me year over year data, good or bad. Show me the year over year. And we'll talk a little bit about achievements and losses later and how that's relevant. But year over year data is a really good snapshot of where you've been and where you're going, why you achieved or why you missed. And then finally, keep it relevant or make it relevant. As shared, articulate alignment to broader organizational goals and demonstrate that value in terms of customer satisfaction and financial impact. For goodness sake, we work in customer education. If you aren't including things like customer CSAT, NPS, customer testimonials, and the like, you're really missing a great opportunity to have the voice of customer represented. So yes, I'm kind of contradicting myself, right? I just said that I want the numbers, but I also like customer testimonials. Those are really good ways to bring those numbers to life and to tell the story, to really thread the story of what it is that you're doing, to back up and triangulate that data with relevant information directly from the customer. Okay, now we move on to the nuts and bolts, the meat and the potatoes, the guts, if you will, the chapters of your report. So we're going to spend a good amount of time here. And we're going to start with the table of contents. This is the recommended table of contents for your annual report. 8 sections, no more, no less. And while 8 sections may feel like a lot, at the end of the day, that might be just 8 slides. It might be a few more depending on what you're trying to present. So we're going to go through them one by one with some examples. And disclaimer, the examples that I'm giving you here use some dummy data from some of the various places that I've worked. So if you try to pull all these together and look at them, you might say, wait, these don't make sense. So know that I'm using some data from 3 different sources if you try to put them all together. So the first section, organizational structure. Your biggest asset, and honestly, your biggest budget line item, is the people that work for you or work with you. So include them up front. Showcase your talent and include that organizational chart. This is an example from the organizational chart that I had at my last organization. So show who you have and where they line up, and show any open roles. But don't stop there. Include your go forward plan. I used to color code when I did this of who was in seat and who was not in seat, and what roles I wanted to hire in the next 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, so that my CEO or my chief customer officer knew what my brain was thinking and how I wanted to shape the organization over time. That way you can plan for any structural changes that you want to make over time as you grow and you scale. This shows your executive team your critical thinking and your strategy of how you will adapt as the business grows and as the business scales, or perhaps as it's downsizing as necessary. And you want to fast follow. You want to show your headcount and your projection. You want to work with your finance team or your HR team on your budget allotment and show where you plan to place heads for the following fiscal year. And you want to be prepared to justify that as a part of your plan. Remember that your end of the year report isn't just a look back, but it is a look forward. A clear headcount projection shows where you plan to put resources and gives your executive team and your team an idea of where you plan to spend money in the next year. It is your ultimate investment strategy. Of course, the caveat is it's going to change based on revenue and retention numbers, but you are out in front of that and you get to call those shots now as opposed to waiting for those shots to be called for you. I would much rather come in with this plan, or have one of my team members come in with this plan and then let me know what they're thinking, as opposed to me try to tell them what to do. This tells me that they've been thinking about what they want to do in the future. They've got a strategy for how they want to grow their organization, and they've got a plan, as opposed to me trying to tell them what to do. Chapter 3, maturity model. Customer education is relatively new, right? It didn't exist 20 years ago. And it's not always completely understood by executives. My CEO at ZoomInfo used to say, I know we need to train them, but I wish we didn't have to. And it was his desire to not have to spend resources on something that he wished was more turnkey for our customers. So tell your executive team where you were, whether you use this maturity model or one from a different vendor or one that you've made up on your own. But tell your executive team where you were, where you are now, and where you plan to be in the next year. Show your growth trajectory. Tell them why you are where you are, why you are not further along, what's preventing you from getting to the next level, and what you need from the organization or the business to get to the next level. I use that red star as an example. That's where we are as an organization. So what's preventing you from getting to number 4 or to level 5? I found when I presented this, the executives that I presented to like being at the top. Every executive that I've had, every CEO that I've had made their start in sales. Sales guys or salespeople like to compete. They like to win. And so the question always became, how can we be best in class? How can we be world class? So when I answered this, I was always able to get resourcing that helped us grow more quickly. And it allowed me to prove out the ROI of my team then and now. And it always came with additional resourcing or questions as to why I didn't have additional resourcing. So it helped them have a different lens on why I wasn't able to get to number 4 or to level 5. Okay, so chapter 4, this is the chapter, the end all be all. It's my favorite chapter because remember I said I was a numbers guy. It's probably why it's my favorite chapter, because this is where you get to showcase the data with data, all the great things that you have done, or maybe the things that you've missed but can still improve on. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on chapter 4 than I have on the other chapters. So forgive me. Whoops. So several years ago, I developed a metrics pyramid that I continue to use today when we talk about the gold standard of reporting on metrics. And so while this necessarily wouldn't be included in your annual report, this pyramid, the pieces or the underlying metrics would be. So I want to walk you through this, and you can use this, any way you choose, but I want to sort of walk you through how I have used it before and how I encourage my teams to use it. So your foundational level, it's your core metrics, things like number of participants, number of registrants, number of attendees. Right above that is your satisfaction metrics, things like CSAT scores, NPS scores, your 5-star ratings on a course or a webinar, your thumbs up, thumb down scores on a knowledge article. Engagement metrics are just that. What does and how often does your customer engage with you? Things like clicks, courses, content. The next level up is where you really start getting towards that gold standard. Are your customers using your product as a result of your efforts in education? Essentially usage metrics, right? Are they going to your knowledge base, taking a course, and then as a result, logging into your product and doing something differently? Are your usage numbers in your product going up as a result of the efforts that your team is doing? And it's not a direct line, it's a correlation, but at the end of the day, you're having an impact on those on usage. And then finally, that true gold standard, those impact metrics, is what you are doing in customer education impacting key company goals like revenue, retention, win rates, adoption, and the like. That's the gold standard. When you can actually put a line, dotted or otherwise, from what you're doing in customer education to those impact metrics, that's when you start to see the lights go off in your executive's head, because that's when you're starting to prove the true ROI of customer education or customer experience programs. In your annual report, if you aren't including the data related to your SLAs and your KPIs, you don't really have an annual report. So on this page, while I listed some here for a typical customer education team, I did present them in list format because this gives your executive team sort of a broad view of what you hold yourself and your team accountable for, and what you hold them to hit week over week, month over month, quarter over quarter, or year over year. I presented them here in sort of list format, and then later on you can present them in sort of dashboard format. This gives them sort of a snapshot of what you hit, what your targets are, and then you can give them sort of your success metrics in later dashboards. And I'll show those here in a second. But remember though, visuals are important. They are the real superstars of your annual report. So on this slide, as you recall, I think it's really important that you have a connection to those company goals. So on this slide, I'm showing the top line figures of renewals. This is something that my team was ultimately held responsible for at my very first company, which was logo retention. So we included that in our annual report, how we aligned to this and impacted this goal. So you should too. What is the big goal that your team connects to? Is it logo retention? Is it gross retention, net retention? Is it dollars? What is it? So include that and make sure you make that either dotted line or solid line connection, because it should be one of the first dashboards you show, the big company goal you align to, because it shows that you have a stake in the game, that you are more than just customer education. You are part of this larger company that's a for-profit company, right, that you're trying to make money for. More examples of dashboards here that speak to executives should be included, right? Here are the ones that we created when I was at ZoomInfo that showed our online university usage, and it was correlated to win rates, the bottom one right there, product usage and renewals and upsells. This allowed me to show that we weren't just a cost center, but we were connected to revenue. And I remember very clearly, it took me 4 years to figure this out at ZoomInfo. And when I finally was able to get this done, and granted it took me 4 years to finally get a BI analyst to do this. And so I had the resourcing to do this, but when I finally was able to do this and present this in an annual report, my CEO actually stood up in the room and started clapping because it was finally the chance I had to prove the ROI of customer education. And I was able to finally get more resourcing because he finally understood the connection between what he was spending money on and how it actually brought in money to the organization. So if for no other reason, this is why you do an annual report. Additionally, have dashboards that reflect the day-to-day work of your team. You can see in sort of small letters up at the top of this dashboard in the black and white header, it says COE week over week. My team was called Customer Onboarding and Education. And it was the week over week dashboard that we looked at every week. In this visual, I've included the one that showed our training webinar attendance, our knowledge-based article hits, our certifications completed, and our training sessions attended. I developed a talk track around the importance of these numbers as it related to the goals that we set at the start of the year and why these numbers contributed to the charts that I've already presented, renewals and retention, right? The theme here was cascading my visuals. So I started with the logo retention. Then I talked about the retention or how my online university contributed to that retention. And then I talked about how the webinars and the participation in our courses and the certifications contribute to that. And so it just was a waterfall of metrics that ultimately correlated to how we contributed to the business outcomes. And one more, if you're serious about your customer education connecting to business outcomes, including data related to how you are impacting product usage and time to value across your product lines is essential. You are far more likely to get buy-in from your product and engineering teams, like your chief product officer or your chief technology officer, with this type of data. So the previous slides, you're getting some buy-in from maybe your CFO or your CEO. And this slide is going to get your buy-in and your excitement from your CPO and your CTO. So now you're starting to get your entire executive team bought into what customer education stands for. Okay, so we've made it through half of your report at this point, and we're going to enter the back half. So chapter 5 starts with your alignment to goals, because as I've shared with you a few times, you have to show how what you have done has aligned to goals, both the organizational goals and the goals you have set within your department. Because failure to do so means failure. Pretty simple. The best way to do that is through cascading your goals, as I've sort of talked about with those reporting dashboards. You did that already when you set up your goals at the start of the year, right? Or at least you should have. Now show that. Prove that out in your report. Show how you connected the dots between the large company goals and the individual employee goals. and make sure and tie it to revenue and retention. The best way to do that is through percentages. Show the percentage of employee goals accomplished and the connection to organizational goals. That way you can say, for example, 90% of my employees' goals were completed and 100% of those goals were tied to 3 of the 5 company goals set at the start of the year. That sounds a lot better than we accomplished what we set out to do at the start of the year, right? A CEO is going to buy way more into that first statement than that last statement. And you want to demonstrate value. This is an example of my team's department goals at Therapy Brands. My job is to connect those goals that are there on the screen to the larger company goals in my annual report. And you can do that through a 1-to-1 or a 1-to-many ratio, but you have to do it. You have to show the connection. And it has to be a straight line. It can't be dotted lines. I can say that I have a goal of being education focused, and I have to be able to connect that to some of the goals that my CEO has set for the larger organization as a whole. And I have to be able to demonstrate that value that my team brings to customers. That's a given. But I also have to demonstrate the value that my team brings to the company every single day in every single interaction that we have. Okay, we're getting close to the end. Chapter 6, because of course, no end of the year report would be complete without an analysis of your wins and your losses. So just like in sales, you have to quantify the good and the bad. So here's how you do it. So you need to be brief. You can cover these in 2 or 3 slides. For achievements, list out your team accomplishments. What did you start with? And what did you finish? But focus on the finishing. What milestones did you hit? And what value did you add to customers and to the business? And use those metrics to add the color. My CEO at ZoomInfo used to say, it's not a win if you just started something or you just thought of something. And that was a hard pill for me to swallow because I used to love to say, well, we started this project. And he would say, I don't care that you just started something. I need to know if you finished it. Don't report on it if you didn't finish it. For losses, show why you lost and give insight into how you won't lose again. We all have losses, and that's okay. I get incredibly sad when my team doesn't bring to me the losses that they have because they're scared to report on those. That means I've failed them as a leader if they're scared to bring me those losses. Because at the end of the day, my job as their leader is to help them overcome those losses. Use the opportunity of a loss to ask for help and how to prevent the loss again in the future. Because your executive team wants you to succeed. I mean, they're spending money on you and your team at the end of the day. So use the chance to challenge your own assumptions. Maybe that certification program that worked at the last company you were at won't work at this one. Maybe an online university isn't smart for this customer base at this new job that you have. So think differently and showcase that as a part of your annual report. When you think about showcasing your achievements, remember this: context, actions, impact, success, and repeat. So in other words, give the context. What actions did you take? What was the impact of those actions? Show the data that made it a success. And then how do you plan to repeat it so that you can do it time and time again? And then from a challenges perspective, remember the 3 Ds: define, data, and dissect. You want to define the problem. You want to gather the data to give you the insights on the problem. And then you want to dissect the issue to understand so that you can make recommendations for improvement. Again, your accomplishments and your challenges are just 2 sides of the same coin. You want to be able to report on both of them. And you want to highlight all of them. Take the good with the bad. You also want to review your tech stack. Oh, I'm sorry. We're almost there. You do have to include your tech stack and your budget because they are intertwined. So as a part of this, you want to review your tech stack. Your executives don't know what Articulate is. They barely know what an LMS is, but they do know what Snowflake is. They do know what their products are. And so you need to show them how they all connect, and you need to connect those dots and how important business intelligence is to you. It's important to them. So show them why it's important to you and why you need to spend money on it, which leads us into the next slide. Review your budget. They know the basics. They have an overview. Your CFO is probably in the room when you're presenting your budget. So they're probably going to grill you a little bit on why you're spending money on these certain lines. So you want to know the ins and outs of your budget. If you're a leader and if you're a director of customer education, you need to know your budget backwards and forwards. So they know it, you should know it. Give them an overview of how you spend your money. Where you plan to invest in people, in resources, and projects will show them your priorities. because where we spend our money is where we prioritize what we're going to do. And ask them for their thoughts, get their feedback, because who knows, maybe they will surprise you with more. Mine did once, and he gave me a 20 additional staff all at once to go start a new team. I wasn't expecting it, but I got it because he saw what I was trying to do and he said, you have not budgeted enough money. Here's additional staff. So you never know in a budget conversation, a CFO or a CEO or a CRO might actually surprise you. Okay, we're at our last chapter. And I want you to end your report with recommendations. We've all heard of the STAR method for interviews. I say adapt it for how you provide your recommendations. Describe the situation you want to create and create the tasks to support it. Develop your strategic or your action plan and define out the results or the KPIs to achieve it. And then go do it. Boom. You have your stated plan for next year and your outline for your end of the report for next year already ready. So let's wrap it up, shall we? So an annual report is just a summary. Please remember that. It's all these things on the left and none of these things on the right. Please don't do these things on the right unless you want to bore your executive team. These things on the right are probably good for you and you probably want to do these. It's going to be a stretch for you not to want to do these things. You're probably going to want to do a data dump. You're probably going to want to put some employee reviews in there. You're probably going to want to put a collection of random facts and figures. Please don't do that. It's bad for your leadership team. It's good for your team, but it's bad for your leadership team who are also listening or reading several other annual reports. As a member of a leadership team, I'm listening and reading to a lot of these, but you've got this. I love annual reports. They're reflective and can be a good way to plan. Use them as such. Don't just write them and present them. Use them as a reflective tool to guide your work. So as I mentioned in the beginning, keep calm. It's annual report writing time. And so with that, I will open it up to Q&A.
Awesome. That was incredible. I mean, the walkthrough was so good. And I appreciate that kind of that recap at the end, where you said don't do, using this as like a one-time reporting thing. So can you talk a little bit more about that, of like what other reporting cadences, right? So if we look, I'll go back one. It said this is not a substitute for regular reporting. So what other cadences would you recommend to folks on the call outside of this annual reporting cycle?
Yeah, I think it varies across different businesses and different orgs, right? So what I've adapted in my businesses, and I've now done it at 3 different places, right, is, well, I actually haven't adapted it at the one I'm at now. And so if my team is on the call, get ready. So in my own individual org, we do what's called a monthly operating review. So it's literally like stats, facts and figures, right? So it's a review of KPIs month over month to see if we're hitting our SLAs and the KPIs that we've set. So in support, it's, what's our time to first response? In education, it's, how many individuals registered for our webinars. In onboarding, it's, how fast did we do the first kickoff call after the time, did they sign on the dotted line? And so we review those month over month. And then we do that at the larger org, right? At the customer experience org, we do that as well. So we sort of look at all of those numbers, and then we sort of look at those trends month over month, quarter over quarter. So I think that those are appropriate to do at the micro and the macro level. And then you do these annual reports more, sort of at an established annual cadence. And those are separate, of course, from sort of the performance appraisals that you do. Those are my thoughts, right? And you have to do what works best for you. I encourage individual teams to look at these on a weekly basis, right? Like everybody should be looking at their KPIs weekly to see like where are the misses, where are the hits, where are the trends. If your VP is asking you questions at any given moment, you shouldn't be caught off guard. And what I love when I send a Slack message to any one of my managers or my leaders, they're quick to respond because they have their data they have their data pulled up and they know what to do. So. Awesome.
I went back to the slide because someone said, can you go back? I didn't get a chance to. All right. So Prasanna is asking, not sure if you've worked with the demand generation marketing team to drive either product attachment, upsell in your previous companies, but curious to learn, relating back to the pyramid, which I think was those different levels of metrics, if there were certain outcomes that marketing could own and drive versus some that was less successful.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, and product marketing and customer education should be attached at the hip, right? And whether it's product marketing or customer marketing, those two are sort of intertwined in some places. They should be attached at the hip. When I worked at ZoomInfo and when I worked at PayScale, I had weekly meetings with the customer marketing and product marketing teams. Those swim lanes are very close together, and they should work together to drive those initiatives, particularly around product adoption. If they're not working together, then there's a miss there, and they should have shared KPIs. When I worked at ZoomInfo, it took us a while to get there, right? Because the first couple of years we were still in startup mode, but by about my fifth, sixth, seventh year, we were starting to have the product teams and the customer experience teams were having shared KPIs around adoption and usage. So absolutely, when you start talking about that pyramid, those things should be sort of in sync with one another.
I'm actually going to pull this slide back up for a second part of the question here around, do you find, is it a muscle that you build, and do you start with surround sound metrics? Hold on, where did this, I'm going to find the metrics. Here we go. So is this something like we want to ultimately measure business impact, but it kind of takes some time, right, to build to...
Oh, absolutely. It took me, so I worked at ZoomInfo for 7.5 years. I didn't get to impact metrics until like year 5. And part of it is because I didn't have a BI team, right? I didn't have Snowflake. I didn't have Tableau. I didn't have the infrastructure to do that. We were using Excel. And so I didn't have the mechanisms to do that. And so you have to start with core, and then you sort of build your way up. It takes time to do that, and it takes time to build the data infrastructure to do that. Start with the core, right? If you're just getting core, that's great. And then slowly but surely build your way up to those impact metrics. I don't expect any customer education team that is getting going to go from 0 to 100 overnight. But start somewhere. Start collecting the data. Store it in a freaking Excel sheet if that's what you have to do. But then as you progress and as you grow and as you scale, that's where you can start to do some real great work.
Awesome. And I'm going to go back to another slide. These slides are amazing. Sebastian was asking about this slide here, and curious to learn a little bit more about the difference between alignment to goals and then the metrics section that you had covered later on. So how do you think about these differently, just like metrics in general versus connecting your goals to organizational goals and metrics?
I think metrics is like data reporting, right? So that is very much like, I have set the goal of XYZ number of attendees at webinars. I have set a number of XYZ customers to complete certifications. I have set a number of individuals to complete this many courses in the learning management system. And that from a customer education perspective, and you can have metrics in onboarding, metrics in support, whatever the case may be. Those are your sort of raw numbers, your KPIs, SLAs, et cetera. Those are your metrics. Now your organization and your organizational goals might be tied to those may be some of your employee goals too, right? Like my frontline support team, my frontline customer education managers might have a goal of having 90% of their individual book of business customers have 90% of those customers trained within 30 days of them coming on board as new customers. That may be their employee goals, but those are then tied to the team goals of having all new customers trained within the first 30 days. And then the organizational goal might be a retention goal of, all customers are retained, or there's a retention goal of logo retention goal of 90%. Well, we can draw that because of one of those dashboards. Remember, was goal, trained customers are 90% more likely to be retained than non-trained customers. So now we can tie with a dotted line that secondary, that middle section to that top section. So you can sort of do that, connect it to the top piece there. And so you cascade it down that way from retention to all customers trained to my book of business trained. And so you can sort of cascade that down. And then that way you can show to your leadership team, like, hey, this individual person's goals is connected to the team's goals to connected to the company's goal of retention.
That was probably the best explanation of that that I've heard to date. So I like the example too, where you kind of gave a real example, because I think that helps us think about how those cascade up or down, how our goals fit back in. So how would people go about learning more, right? So you kind of had a joke earlier on where you're like, this is everybody's favorite time of the year, annual reporting time. Most of us don't, right? We got into this field because we love to teach and we love to interact with people. We love to develop learning content. We don't always like getting into dashboard development and rolling up our sleeves in data analysis. What are some practical ways that we can learn more on the data analysis side, but also on how do we do like data storytelling at work? What are some things that you found helpful in your own career growth?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I don't know if lucky is the right word, but I went to school for it, right? So I have these 3 little letters after my last name, and so and part of it was taking a bunch of data analysis courses. And so that's a little bit of the, forgive the jargon, but a little bit of the nerd in me. But with that said, when I first stepped foot at the door at ZoomInfo, I didn't know what I was doing when it came to sort of the data collection pieces. And so my first stop was with our BI team. And we didn't even have a BI team at that point. It was literally like who was crunching numbers, and it was our FP&A team, right? And so the FP&A team was running a lot of the Excel stuff, right? And so I started partnering with them on helping me create some Excel graphs, and we would suck in a bunch of the data from our platform and our products into Excel, some of the usage data, and we would compare it. We would run the pivot tables with the data from our learning management system, and that was my first set of reports. And then we were able to grow from there when we hired an actual BI analyst, and then we got better tools like Tableau and Snowflake. And so start with what you can and sit down with the people that can that know how to do that, right? And that's all it takes. It's just a curious mind. And I get it. Like, not everybody wants to talk data, but just be curious. Just ask the question. I think if you're in customer education and you enjoy creating content, you should naturally want to know why you're creating content. It shouldn't just be, I'm creating content because I want people to learn. It should be, I'm creating content because I want people to learn, because I want people to be successful at what they're doing. And the successful at what they're doing is because they bought your software, because they bought your product, or because they're, enjoying your widget, whatever the case may be. And so take it to that nth degree, right? It's not just like, teachers, right? I was an 8th grade teacher for a half a minute, and I wasn't teaching just to teach. I was teaching 8th graders because I wanted them to go out and do something good in society, right? And so take it to that next level. Take why you're doing what you're doing to that next level, and be curious about that. Be curious about that next step. And if you are, then that'll get you there.
I love that. One final question from Audrey. How do you involve your team in gathering data, making recommendations? So I know you have a pretty large team. What does that look like at different levels?
Yeah. So this is where your CRM is your friend, right? So, we use I've used Salesforce everywhere I've been. So I recognize that not everybody has or uses Salesforce, but your CRM is your friend. And I think it's important that every place you're at, or wherever you're at, and every team member should be at least minimally versed in how to pull reports in your CRM, so that they can pull their own data reports. And if they're not, then you pull reports and walk them through them in your stand-ups or in your team meetings, so that they can see that data and they can understand it. A great example, when I worked at ZoomInfo, when we first started doing those week-over-week reports, not everybody had access to Salesforce. And so we pulled those data reports into a PowerPoint. And every week I had them go in and pull and push those data points into a PowerPoint. And we reviewed those before we had the Salesforce access or the Tableau reports. And we reviewed them just in a stand-up meeting every week. And so a couple of people was the data collection, but everybody had the ability to do the data analysis in those meetings. And it was like, okay, well, talk to me about why those numbers are going up or down. And it wasn't a matter of me questioning why? What the heck went wrong here? It was more like, hey, everybody, like, what's going on here? Or this is great. Tell me why. And so it was sort of the all skate part of the competition, right? Like, let's figure this out together. And it gave everybody the opportunity to be a part of the conversation.
I like that a lot. Yeah. And to think, why does this, the example that always comes to mind for me is my uncle managed a Barnes and Noble. And so I job shadowed him when I was a kid. And one of the things that he would do every day when he closed the store is look at, how much they had brought in that day, but then make notes. Was there a Harry Potter book release? Was there a storm? Was there rain? Like, what are these trends so that you can understand what's impacting performance? And I just think about that a lot of like, we don't always know, right? Or maybe someone has that knowledge of, hey, actually this thing was happening at that time, or this other thing happened. And when you bring together that knowledge, you just have more insight on maybe why the numbers look the way that they do.
Yeah.
Okay. I said last question, but actually Bethany had a question. What do you do if you don't have good data to work with? So she explains a little bit more. Our team isn't able to track product adoption to showcase that learners who take courses then use the product more, and their help center isn't gated, so they can't see who's consuming content. So I have to imagine you've been in this situation, because I think a lot of us have, whether it's the ungated help center or a product that's not instrumented. So how have you overcome this challenge?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I think the question then becomes for you to sit down with your leadership team to find out what it is that you're trying to get ROI, right? What is the purpose of what you're trying to do? Because then it's not customer education, right? Like, customer education is specifically for customers. If that help center isn't gated, then it's education, right? And that's fine. Like, that's fine. Then track it from that perspective. Like, sit down with the leadership team or whoever it is that makes those sort of decisions at your company, and try to figure out, like, what's our goal? What's our purpose here? Again, remember, trying to track it back to those sort of organizational goals, and get those answers. Because at the end of the day, like, when I worked at ZoomInfo, everything was gated. Everything was gated until the very end, and then we opened up everything. And then it shifted. It shifted to now our university isn't about revenue and retention. It became about education qualified leads. And now it's a totally different metric that we're going to look at. And so it literally everything changed on its head, but it still was something that it still was a data point we could track. But it was great, right? I went from reporting on how we impacted revenue to impacting how we impacted leads. And so that's great. It just was a different methodology and a different viewpoint. So think about working with your executive team to think about what's the purpose of the program that you're shaping or that you're putting out into the world, and that's then the direction that you want to settle on the data on how you want to report on the data. Both of those mechanisms were fine. It was just a matter of like how we wanted to think about it. And so for you, and I can't remember your name, I think it was Brittany. If your help center isn't gated and it's open to everybody, maybe it's a lead generating tool. And so is it generating leads? If there's clicks that you can then, figure out if it's non-customers or customers, maybe you can, I don't know. But if you can, then maybe it's a lead gen tool. And then you can see if it's helping the marketing team actually pull people through the marketing pipeline.
That's a really good perspective, that what matters depends on kind of where your business is at. So I think sometimes we want the playbook, and the hardest thing about being in customer education is there is no good playbook because it's highly variable. And I think you spoke really well to that. That's it for our questions. Tom, thank you so much for coming and sharing. Everybody on the call today, thank you for coming and joining. We've got one more presentation for you today, a panel on getting buy-in or maintaining buy-in for your customer education program. So you can find the link to that underneath the video. Again, please rate the video underneath this video and give us some feedback. Let us know what you liked, what you want to learn more about. But we're happy to do this. Love having you here. Again, thank you, Tom, and look forward to meeting you in person soon.
Yes, thank you, everyone, and we appreciate it.